speaker. I'm really pleased to introduce Marsha Ramroop. She's got her, we've already got her slides up. Marsha is a founder and of Unheard Voice. She has committed contribution in the media with journalism and is here today to share fixing the problem of unconscious bias. So I'll pass you over to Marsha. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much indeed for having me with you today. I'm going to ask you some questions to quite shortly to kick us off, and hopefully cementing and embedding and backing up a lot of what Marcia's just said. I'm going to ask you to get out your smartphones and get them ready and go to menteecom in your browser and just keep that page open. And whilst you fiddle around with that and do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, because quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're not paying a huge amount of attention. It's the important bit later that I'd really like you to listen to. So my name's Marsha Ramroop. I describe myself as an inclusive change strategist and partner. And what that means is I work alongside organisations to take them on an inclusion journey. So I don't provide one-off training sessions. And I have a framework based on something called cultural intelligence, which is an academically robust, proven methodology to lead to inclusive behaviours and workplaces. And I'll be telling you about that. So hopefully that's given you enough time to get to mentee.com, and we'll use that in just a second. There's been a real step change recently in the ways organisations and businesses are starting to look at inclusion. And I've been hearing a lot, and you've been talking a lot about the racial justice agenda today. And that is a massive piece of the inclusion puzzle. But just whilst I'm talking today, I'm going to be looking at inclusion not just about race, but inclusion as inclusion for all, not just one underrepresented group, because it's inclusion for all or it's not inclusion at all. And if we talk about race over here and sexuality over there and disability over here and gender and generations, we do miss some important issues. And one of the key things about that is the way we might label other people, and even the way the law might label people, might not necessarily correspond to the identity someone might choose for themselves. So we have to be really careful about how we approach these things. So when I talk about underrepresentation and discrimination, I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about all aspects, groups and populations affected. And in the attempt to try to do something about underrepresentation and discrimination, many people are looking at unconscious bias awareness training. So if I'm going to talk about UB, I'm referring to unconscious bias. So I want to explore that with you. So I'm going to share the screen again. And fingers crossed, this is going to work. So on your screen, on your phones, hopefully you've gone to mentee.com and you need to input that code up here, 7566290, and answer the question, how many bits of information is your brain processing in any given moment? So answer away, and hopefully yes, it's working, woohoo! So the answers that I've given you there, 11,000, 110,000, 1 million or 11 million. So in any given moment, how is your brain process? How many bits of information is your brain processing? I'll just give you 10 more seconds on that. Great. The answer is taking a long time to appear. The answer is 11 million. So of that 11 million, how many can you consciously process in that given moment? So you've got these 11 million pieces of information going in your brain at any one moment. How many can you actually consciously process? I'm glad this is working, by the way. So we got some couple of 4,000s, 400, 5 people saying 40, a lot of people saying 4. I'll give you 10 more seconds on that. Correct answer is, if I hit enter, it should show me, but for some, it's 40. There you go. It's flashed up 40. So let me just reshare the screen again. There you go, 11 million, 40. And those statistics come from Timothy Wilson. He's a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia and author of the book Strangers to Ourselves, Discovering the Adaptive Unconscious. And as far as I've seen, those statistics have not been challenged. In fact, they're frequently quoted in academic work on unconscious bias. Keep menteecom to hand. We're going to need it again in a bit. It's well documented that unconscious bias awareness training is a sop to inclusion efforts. And this is a direct quote from a head of D&I at a prominent organisation. It's clear that realising UB exists and how it manifests itself and the impact is important. But expecting people to be aware of their unconscious and somehow change what they're doing is not actually possible. If you take the academic paper by Forsha Lai et al. in 2019, it's called A Meta-Analysis of Procedures to Change Implicit Measures. It is an academic paper. I haven't read it all the way through, but I have read the key pull-out bits of information, and it aggregates into 492 studies on unconscious bias with nearly 90,000 participants. So it's pretty robust. And it concludes this. We found that implicit measures can be changed, but the effects are often weak. And most studies focused on producing short-term changes with brief single-session manipulations, so basically one-off workshops. They did not mediate changes in explicit behaviour. Our findings suggest that changes in implicit measures are possible, but they don't translate into explicit behaviour. So even if weak changes occur, like it doesn't make a difference to anybody in terms of the way that people behave. So the recommendation from the author of the report is try not to change implicit bias, because that's not possible. Instead, focus on working around it. Target other intergroup incomes and teach folks to create procedural changes that prevent the influence of hidden biases. And if you add to this the work of Alexandra Kalev, who's a professor of sociology and anthropology at Tel Aviv University, they did a whole article about this on the BBC website, and there's the link. Alexandra has done a lot of research into unconscious bias training, and her findings are astonishing. It's not that just that bad training doesn't work, but it can be counterproductive and actually reduces the number of women and people of colour in managerial positions. We're talking about leadership being so important. She's found that efforts to get people to suppress their stereotypes can actually work to reinforce them. Often any positive change is weak and short term. One theory is that if the training tells us we're all biased, we might no longer think that we need to make an effort, or that making that effort will make any difference. Afterwards, the participant might come away with a sense of relief. They've been shown that their bias isn't really their fault at all. The eagerness to label all bias as unconscious could allow us to evade responsibility.
Marsha, your screen's frozen. Just gonna put a message. Is it with yours as well?
Yeah, she's frozen, but I think we need to go on. Who's after Marsha?
Adrian.
You want to do a dance?
Yeah.
You can.
Right, I think, yeah. Can we go to Adrienne?
Yes, certainly.
If you say that.
There's been some technical problem with Marsha's presentation. So I've just been told to give them 2 minutes. So we're just going to wait. We're just going to wait for a little while, see if we can just get her back on.
Why not take a 2-minute break so that you can call her or whatever?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, we'll come back up after 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I don't know whether to be to subscribe to conspiracy theories and say, oh, I'm talking about unconscious bias and Microsoft want to come down on me and but I think I've managed to get everything back. It was so bizarre, the whole screen just crashed. So and it was a Microsoft message that came up saying, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, we've got a problem. I'll go back to sharing my screen. I don't know at what point we got to, but I'm really hopeful that you heard what I was saying about Alexandra Kalev and the fact that she says that unconscious bias training can actually reinforce unconscious biases. I'll stop sharing for just a moment and hopefully that will help the system cope. There are online and they're face-to-face unconscious bias courses, and I've done both. And whilst it's really good and helps open up the conversation about how it exists and how it manifests itself, it doesn't focus enough about the impact, and it still expects people to mitigate it themselves. And it makes no mention of the requirement of processes and structures to change in order to assist with mitigation. The Equality and Human Rights Commission also produced a report called Unconscious Bias Training, an assessment for the evidence of effectiveness. And that also points to raising awareness of it being useful by having conversations, but the evidence of behaviour change is weak. And Daniel Kahneman, the father of heuristics, he says it's extremely difficult to catch yourself doing something unconsciously. Have you ever been in that situation where you're having a conversation with someone and they then look at you strangely and they say something like, did you mean pajamas because you just said slippers? And then you say, no, I didn't. I said pajamas. And then you're looking around for someone else to verify and they'll say, no, I'm afraid you did say slippers. And it's that thing where you're not you're not even aware that you said the thing that you didn't mean to say. Well, Daniel Kahneman, he says, when asked why you make a decision, you'll convince yourself of a valid reason, when in reality, your unconscious forced you to come to a conclusion based on your bias, based on your shortcutting of information. It's a cerebral process of which you're completely unaware. And yet the conscious decision-making process is who you think you are. In fact, I'm going to grab the book. This is the book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And I'm going to go to the point in the book because his actual words are really worth hearing. And he talks about system 1 and system 2. System 1 is what he calls is essentially your unconscious thinking, and system 2 is your conscious thinking. And he says system 2 is who we think we are. System 2 articulates judgments, makes choices, and often endorses or rationalizes ideas and feelings are generated by system 1, your unconscious. You may not know that you're optimistic about a project because something about its leader reminds you of your beloved sister, or that you dislike a person who looks vaguely like your dentist. If asked for an explanation, however, you will search your memory for presentable reasons and will certainly find some. Moreover, you will believe the story that you make up. Often we make mistakes because we, our conscious thinking, do not know any better. Our unconscious is indeed the origin of much of what we do wrong, but it's also the origin of most of what we do right, which is most of what we do. Our thoughts and actions are routinely guided by our unconscious and are generally on the mark. This unconscious system recognizes the cognitive ease with which we process information, but it does not generate a warning signal when it becomes unreliable. There's no simple way for our conscious system to distinguish between a skilled and a shortcut response. The only recourse is to slow down. So to conclude the point, the repeated suggestion that you hear bandied around that just by being aware of unconscious bias, racial bias, sexual bias, age bias, whatever the bias might be, is not enough to mitigate. We must stop saying and teaching that. We need to stop putting store in one-off interventions. If we simply choose someone to work in a role partly because of their basis of an underrepresented characteristic in order to try to counteract our bias, that bias is still going to play out and potentially harm that person that we're working with. We must look to ourselves to do some work. And it doesn't really matter what your background is, we all have biases. What we have to do is take responsibility for them. Oh, am I sharing my screen? Something's changed. Is it all good?
No, we can't see your screen. We can't actually get the spotlight on you either. So I don't know, something's happened when it sort of crashed, but we can't actually see your screen at the moment.
Okay,
But
so you can hear me.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so to be clear, I just want to make a point clear on what I've just said. I'm not saying that you don't hire people on the basis of underrepresentation. That has to happen too. What I'm outlining is the move from tokenistic measures to meaningful ones. So I've outlined the problem. So to go back to the title of the talk, how do we fix it? What should we put store in? How do you move from knowing you want to be better at diversity and inclusion to actual outcomes? And I believe the answer to that is something called cultural intelligence. And Marcia has actually outlined quite a lot of what this is, but I will give you a bit more of insight into some of the background. Cultural intelligence, also known as CQ, is the capability to work and relate effectively with people who are different from you. CQ has been developed using the same basis as IQ and EQ. It's a measurement and it's a number, and it's also an improvable skill. So when the researchers were thinking about this issue, they were asking a really interesting question. They asked, what's the difference between those who succeed in today's multicultural, globalized world and those that fail? What's the difference between success and failure? And they came up with 4 capabilities which make up CQ in order to be effective at working and relating with those who are different from you. Let me just share the correct screen. Just stop presenting that for a moment and go to here. Can you see the screen? Does it say? Brilliant,
yes,
excellent. So it starts with CQ drive, and CQ drive is motivation. Do you want to be better at working and relating to people who are different from you? Really important thing when we're thinking about any kind of behavioural change. Do you want to do it? And how you motivate yourself is a very key important part of that. And the next part is CQ knowledge. And what do you know? What do you need to know? What are the known unknowns? I know I'm sounding a bit like Donald Rumsfeld. What are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and the unknown unknown knowns? But it's really important, you know, what have your experiences highlighted that you don't know? This is the biggest piece of the puzzle, and it's here that we have to start looking at underrepresentation. Who's not at the table? Who's not in the room? What do you need to know about these groups? How do they compare to you? What are your values? And how much patience do you have for those whose values are different to yours? Very much what Marcy was saying. So at this point, I know I'm doing lots of screen sharing, but can we open up menteecom again? And hopefully you can see that question. You're on a sinking boat and you have a choice to save your mother, your spouse, or your child. Who do you save? And for the purposes of this philosophical question, I hope it's okay to assume that you have all 3. So this is different code this time, 561048. So you're on a sinking boat and you have a choice to save your mother, your spouse, your child. Who do you save? Everyone's saving the child right now. Poor hubby. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, hubby. Oh, mum's getting a look in this time. Someone's looking out for hubby or wifey or other partner. Oh, child, yeah, absolutely, going for it with the child. I'll just give you 5 more seconds on that. So, going back to this, is that not working? Not wanting to share with me now. In Western societies, 60% save the child and 30% save the spouse. What do you think happens in Asian and Asian and Middle Eastern and African countries? Type in an answer with child, spouse, or mother followed by percentage. What do you think happens when that question is asked in African, Middle Eastern and Asian countries? So basically culturally a different response. That still should work, so you should be able to, from menteecom, go to your next. Yeah, mother. Yeah. More people going with mother. Yeah, more people going with mother. Yeah, so in those countries, the response is 80% save mum. And I remember the first time I heard that, I literally shouted out in the training room, no, that's wrong. My poor mum, if she was dead, she'd be turning in her grave. And I came to understand that being culturally intelligent is understanding that what's acceptable and familiar to me may not be acceptable and familiar to you. That doesn't mean that either of us are right or wrong. It's just a different perspective. And CQ knowledge helps unpick those different perspectives, even if they seem completely alien to you. And that is a massive part of being inclusive. I really want to be able to share this. Yes, I am. It is working good. So the next piece of the puzzle is strategy. This is where mitigating unconscious bias is really crucial, because if you're motivated to do some work and you've got a bit of knowledge and you don't plan, just like Marcy was talking about, you're in danger of acting in a stereotypical way. So you need to put in structures and procedures around you to accept feedback in order to mitigate it, self-awareness, planning, etc. All of those things really, really important. And finally, we have CQ action. It's ultimately people judge you on your behaviours. Someone high in CQ has a broad repertoire of behaviours that they can draw on and allow them to stretch. So this doesn't mean being inauthentic to yourself. It's about encompassing other people's values and ideas in order to be more effective at relating and working to people who are different from you. But that's not all. That's the foundation of what you need. In order to create inclusive cultures and organisations, you need the cornerstones to embed that. So fostering understanding is about your teams knowing why you want the change to happen. They believe in it as well. They need to be able to develop talents and skills. That means being trained to behave in the new way and given the opportunity to behave in the new way. They have to be supportive formal mechanisms, which is about policies, procedures. If you think about recruitment, you don't want that to be done in the same way that you've always done it, because invariably, if it's prioritised on cost and convenience, you're requiring fast decisions. And what we do know is that fast decisions can rely on unconscious bias. And of course, you need role modelling. Far more people are likely to miss the change if they see other people acting in the new way. So if you have CQ as your foundation and the organisation is led by individuals who are culturally intelligent, this can be cemented in teams, reaching out to those you disagreed with in the past, put together policies, make room for those you haven't done before. And that's how you do it. You then implement it across recruitment, staffing, output and users. And it's a very granular piece of work. It's relatively straightforward to describe, but it requires the boring stuff, as what Tina was saying, the time, effort and resource, because achieving inclusion is a journey. It's not a one-off half-day workshop, and there are no silver bullets. But in my experience, this is how you fix the problem of unconscious bias. I'd rather race to the end there because of the technical issues, but if you want to get in contact with me, that's how. And I don't know if you've got any time for questions, but I'm willing to take them.
I'm sorry.